Maybe William James Bonin was a product of his environment. He was the middle of three sons born to grossly dysfunctional parents, both alcoholics, both who abused and neglected their children. Or maybe he was born bad. From a very young age, people complained about how aggressive and badly behaved he was. He spent time in juvenile hall for riding a bike into a group of young girls, and he came out worse than he went in. He was eventually sent off to a convent school where he was subjected to more abuse and allegedly sexually assaulted by a 13-year-old student who defended him from bullies. He was only 8 when he left that school. This wasn't the only person to abuse him, and Bonin would, in turn, abuse his younger brother. Maybe the combination of nature and nurture was just a perfect storm that turned Bonin into a serial killer. Though he was bisexual and more interested in males, he dated a female classmate and would later become engaged to her, likely to satisfy his mother, who was abusive toward him due to his sexuality. He was also a pedophile by the time he was in his late teens, a fact he tried to keep hidden. He began luring and molesting neighborhood kids after he dropped out of high school. His mother would finally throw him out of the house and he would join the U.S. Air Force. He went off to Vietnam, where he would later confess he sexually assaulted 2 soldiers who were under his command at gunpoint. And he abused young girls there. Despite that, he was granted an honorable discharge in 1968. Returning from Vietnam, his fiancée left him to marry another man, taking their son with her. Family members would say this already disturbed man would be different after he came back. He was 21 now, and things were about to get even more serious. It was November 17th, 1968, in Arcadia, California. Bonin was driving his mother's car, a white Chevy station wagon. He would run into Billy Jones, a 14-year-old boy, and offer to take him home. Billy accepted the ride. A lot of kids did that back then. But he became uncomfortable with the way Bonin was talking to him and asking him questions about homosexuality. Instead of driving the boy home, he drove to a closed shopping center. There, he handcuffed the boy and raped him, knocking him unconscious. He took the boy over to a park bench and left him there. The boy's mother, though, would report Bonin to the police. Bonin had been out of the Air Force for less than a month. John Treadwell was 17 and hitchhiking in Southern California. It was near midnight on November 26 when Bonin picked him up. Again with the uncomfortable sex talk, Bonin seemed enraged by his own sexuality, and that was something psychiatrists would come back to. This time Bonin produced a handgun. He bludgeoned the boy and raped him. He threatened that his friends would avenge him if he ever told anyone what happened. Using the same MO, he then assaulted Alan Pruitt, who was 17, on December the 4th, and then Lawrence Bretman, 12, on January 1st, 1969. Bretman was spared sodomy, but he was also robbed. And then on January 12th, there was another hitchhiker, 18-year-old Jesus Monk. By now, police had a good description of Bonin, and they were extensively looking for the man. He was in his mother's car with a runaway, 16-year-old Timothy Wilson, when he was pulled over by an El Segundo policewoman. It was 2:30 in the morning, and Bonin was behaving in a frantic way. She cuffed him as she processed him. He cried and insisted that she jail him, that he was not responsible for what he was doing. That could have ended it there, but it didn't. He was indicted. 5 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of sodomy, counts of oral copulation, child molestation, and attempt to assault. He was submitted to 2 different psychiatric examinations. The psychiatrists would agree that the man was a sexual psychopath. He pleaded guilty to 2 offenses and was sentenced to time in a state hospital. He was aggressive with other patients there, and he announced that future victims of his would be eliminated. Professionals classified him with a high probability to reoffend as an extreme sociopath. He was transferred because of his behavior against other patients. Despite all of that, in June 1974, he was released. Doctors had concluded that he was no longer a danger to others. But he was. He moved to Hollywood, hoping to mix in with the gay community there, but he wasn't well accepted. He was socially inept, and so he would move back in with his parents. By March 1975, he was picking up hitchhikers again. In September, he would viciously assault David Allen McVicker, who was 14 and hitchhiking his way to his parents' house in Huntington Beach. He nearly strangled McVicker to death, but the boy pleaded, "God, help." And Bonin would just stop immediately. Then, though, more terror. He would tell the boy, "I was going to kill you, but I want to come back for you and use you again." Imagine the psychological terror. Bonin was found and arrested for this and another assault where he attempted to drive over a boy who rejected his offer of money for sex. When he was arrested, he assured the officers that next time there won't be any more witnesses. He was sent off to prison for 1 to 15 years. He would be released again in October 1978. No worries, though, because, he had to serve 18 months on probation. More disaster would come, and it would come quickly. He moved into an apartment complex. There he met another pedophile, Everett Scott Fraser. Fraser threw parties nearly every night that involved young men, drugs, and alcohol. Fraser and Bonin talked frequently about their sexual interest in teenage boys. Fraser thought, "Hey, this is a good guy." He would eventually move with his younger brother to Silverado. They tried to start up a bar there called the Alpine Inn, but Bonin's criminal record meant that they couldn't get a permanent liquor license. No matter how short-lived the bar business, it said that Bonin locked a 16-year-old in one of the rooms there and threatened to bury him in the hills. Yeah, so much for any reform. At Fraser's parties, Bonin also met Vernon Robert Butts, who was 21 at the time, and Gregory Matthews Miley, who was 18. Bonin would say Butts was his very first friend. They had a lot in common. A lot. Butts was also fascinated by sadist homosexual behavior. The two were lovers who frequently talked about death. Bonin suggested they rape and kill a teenager, a hitchhiker, together. Butts was all in, despite his later claim that he only became involved because he was afraid of Bonin. He enjoyed what was happening in the rear of his van while he drove, and Bonin abused and then murdered victims. Butts would get all up in that abuse and the murders as well. Miley would also accompany Bonin on at least 2 murders. They were also lovers and accomplices, and Bonin would one day say that he felt social belonging with Butts and Miley. And now you have some insight into how these folks meet each other and decide together to commit the most horrific acts. A sense of social belonging in a life of neglect and abuse. A sociopath network, if you will. Bonin would begin to travel around in a grayish Ford Econoline van with a yellow stripe painted midway along its sides. And if you thought things were sick and twisted before, it's gonna get worse. And with each incident, the sadism, the brutality, and the cruelty will only increase. We won't go into extreme detail, otherwise this video would be removed quickly. And also because we don't really need to hear all the details to understand how horrific it is. And honestly, if we did tell you the details, we'd probably be put up on child porn charges. But again, we don't have to know the minute details, do we? Bonin would be the one to pick the victim. They were all young males from age 12 through 19. They were either hitchhikers, male sex workers, or schoolboys. Most were white or Latino. They were long-haired, slender, and pale. He would either entice them into that econoline or force them in there. Once inside, they were overpowered and bound. They were sexually assaulted, beaten extensively, and tortured before they were strangled. A small handful of victims were either stabbed or beaten to death. One was forced to drink a poison, and one died of shock from his injuries. All were mutilated. Bonin outfit that econoline for one purpose: torture and murder. He took away all of the inside door handles. The only way to get out was the driver's door. It was stocked with ligatures, knives, pliers, wire hangers, whatever he felt he needed to hurt and then dispatch young men and boys. Once done, Bonin would often drive from one county, where he picked up the victim, to another, where he would dump his victim, always alongside or very close to the freeway. For that reason, he was given the moniker the Freeway Killer. Not very original, but accurate. He thought spreading out the dump sites would prevent police from connecting the murders. Serial killers often keep trophies, and for Bonin it was a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about his murders. He was bizarre about that at work. At Dependable Drive-Away, excitedly talking about each murder as it was published in the papers. Workers there would say he was obsessed with the case. Little did they know. One of his 4 accomplices helped him commit 12 of the murders, at least, and so was a serial killer himself. There may have been several more. We'll get to more about his accomplices shortly. Let's deal with the victims first, and remember that we're just not going to go into the most gruesome of the details. On May 28, 1979, Bonin and Butts were out in that econoline. 13-year-old Thomas Glenn Lundgren was on his way to a neighborhood skate park to meet a man who said he wanted photos of him for a skateboarding magazine. He left his parents' house in Reseda about 10:50 a.m. He would be found wearing only a t-shirt, shoes, and socks later that afternoon in Agora. His underwear and his jeans, along with part of his body, was found in a nearby field. He was their first known murder victim. Their next victim was the boy who died of shock due to his injuries, 17-year-old Mark Shelton. Bonin and Butts were at a drive-in movie theater in Westminster on August the 4th. Mark was also headed to the movies, to a theater near Beach Boulevard. Bonin offered him $400 for sex, a fortune in those days, and Mark got into the van. Bonin drove around while Butts abused the boy, and then they both assaulted and killed him. He was dumped near a gravel road in the Cajun Pass area in San Bernardino County. During the evening of August 5th, Marcus Grabs was trying to hitchhike the Pacific Coast Highway. He was a student from West Germany, as it was then, and was 17 years old. It was coming on the twilight hours. He ran into Bonin and Butts sometime between 6 and 10 p.m. Bonin would claim that there were consensual relations, but that's not likely. He was bound, sexually assaulted, and beaten. He was stabbed 77 times, and his body discarded in Malibu Creek, near Las Virgenes Canyon Road, where he was found the next morning. This all might have ended on August 9th, 1979, when Bonin was detained for molesting a 17-year-old boy in Dana Point. He was on parole and should have been violated and sent back to prison, but no. He was released because of an administrative error. He would not show up for his next court date. When Fraser picked him up from the Orange County Jail, he would hear a similar refrain. Bonin vowed that there would never be anyone to testify again. He was living back with his parents and his younger brother. Neighbors would describe the large number of boys who would come and go from that house. He lured them in with alcohol and porn. Neighbors would hear screaming and crying coming from that house, even when the mother and brother were home. Mom and bro, though, would deny that any abuse ever happened around them. None of it would be reported to police until well after Bonin's arrest for murder. On August 20th, Butts and Bonin were at it again, this time picking up Robert Wirstick, 18, and once they were done taking turns abusing the boy, dumping his remains along Interstate 10, where he was found more than a month later. A week later, they abducted Donald Ray Hooten, 15, on Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood. It was 1 a.m., and in order to get to the boy, they actually cut across 2 lanes of traffic, right in front of police officers, but no one stopped the van. That early morning, in the midst of torturing Donald, Butts would tell him that he had entered the death van. He was dumped at a construction site near the Ventura Highway, discovered later that morning. They killed David Louis Murillo, 17, on September the 9th. He was discovered in a bed of ivy along Highway 101 on the 12th. On November 1st, Bonin and Butts killed an unidentified boy who would later be found discarded in an irrigation ditch alongside State Route 99 near Bakersfield. Bonin would kill Frank Dennis Fox, 17, on his own on November 30th. He was found 2 days later along the Ortega Highway near San Juan Capistrano. Then on December 10th, he killed John Frederick Kilpatrick, 15, who was found on the 13th in a remote area of Rialto. He would then take Michael Francis McDonald, 16, near the Chico Airport on New Year's Day. He was found alongside Highway 71 near Chino. Bonin picked up Gregory Miley on the evening of February 3, 1980, and together they killed 15-year-old Charles Miranda. Miranda had been hitchhiking on Santa Monica Boulevard. They dumped him in an alleyway in Los Angeles. Not 5 minutes after dumping Charles, Bonin was wanting to do it again. And so at Huntington Beach, they lured 12-year-old James McCabe into the death van, promising to drop him off at Disneyland. He would be dumped near a dumpster at a construction site in Walnut instead. Bonin and Miley, having robbed the child, went for lunch with the money. The following day, Bonin would be arrested for a parole violation and sit in Orange County Jail until March 4th. Once he was released, it would not take long for him to kill again. On March 14th, he abducted and killed 18-year-old Ronald Gatlin, dumping him in Duarte. A week later, he killed 14-year-old hitchhiker Glenn Norman Barker. The very same day, he would abduct 15-year-old Russell Dwayne Rue from a bus stop in Garden Grove. In the early hours of the 22nd, he was dumped next to Barker's body in the Cleveland National Forest. They were found together there on the 23rd. He had been at Fraser's place one night that March and offered William Ray Pugh a ride home. William was 17. He confessed to the killings to Pugh after Pugh tried to leave the car and told him that the only reason he wasn't planning to rape and kill him was that they were seen together leaving Fraser's party. Pugh was released and said he ran home terrified. But on March the 25th, 1980, Bonin and Pugh abducted Harry Todd Turner, who was just 15. Once they did what they did with him, they dumped him at the delivery door of a business in Los Angeles. On April the 10th, Bonin killed Stephen John Woods, 16, and then went to a job interview and ate pizza with Woods' remains still in the van. He was waiting until dusk to discard him in a Long Beach alleyway. He then killed Darren Kendrick, 19, on April the 29th, with the help of Butts. Kendrick put up a fierce fight for his life. He was left behind a warehouse near the Artesia Freeway, along with a murder weapon, an ice pick. On May 12th, he abducted and killed 17-year-old Lawrence Sharp, and on the 19th, he killed 14-year-old Sean King. Gay rights activists were ensuring the killing stayed in the media and pressuring police to find the killer. They offered up to a $50,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of the perpetrators. On their part, police from the various jurisdictions where the youths had been abducted or dumped had established several links between their cases, and they began sharing information with one another. They formed a task force in 3 of the jurisdictions to try to identify and apprehend the killers. In May 1990, Hugh was arrested for auto theft. He told a counselor about Bonin's confession, and the counselor notified police. Hugh told police everything he knew, well, except that he left out the part where he participated in one of the murders himself. While Pugh was talking to police, Bonin invited an 18-year-old homeless man, James Michael Monroe, to live with him at his mother's house in exchange for sex. On June 1st, after Monroe moved in, Bonin would tell him that he wanted Monroe to abduct, sexually assault, and murder a hitchhiker with him. Little would Bonin or Monroe know that the very next day, June 2nd, the Los Angeles police would begin surveillance of Bonin, their primary suspect in the freeway murders. Just before the surveillance team would begin, Bonin and Monroe ran into Stephen J. Wells, 18. He was at a bus stop on El Segundo Boulevard. They enticed the young man into the van. The trio went back to Bonin's house, and it's here that Wells was murdered and loaded into a cardboard box. Bonin and Monroe loaded the box into the van. They drove with the body to Butt's place, where they showed it off. Wells was discarded at a disused gas station in Huntington Beach. Because they were on the move before surveillance began, surveillance officers did not see any of this. However, for the next 9 days, they watched Bonin carefully. On June 11, 1980, he was seen driving randomly in Hollywood. He tried to lure 5 different boys into his van, but failed. Then on attempt 6, a youth did get into that van. Police followed him to a service station parking lot near the Hollywood freeway. They approached the van and heard muffled screams and banging. They forced their way in, only to discover Bonin was in the middle of raping a handcuffed and bound 17-year-old Harold Eugene Tate. He was charged with rape at first and then held on suspicion of Miranda's murder. He couldn't make a $250,000 bond, and so in jail he stayed. Monroe heard about the arrest, stole Bonin's car, and fled to Michigan. They searched Bonin's house and found extensive traces of blood. His van, though, well, that was gold. What with all the implements of bondage and torture in there, and the blood, and the pièce de résistance, that scrapbook of newspaper clippings found inside the glove box. All that, though, and it would take a mum to break Bonin. He denied the killings. Denied. And then the lead investigator read him a letter. It was a letter from a mom, Sean King's mom, begging Bonin to tell where her son's body was located. Bonin would deny this, though, and say he just wanted a hamburger. And if he went with police to show them where to find King, they would get him a hamburger. Bonin would then confess to 21 murders, expressing no remorse for any of them. He was only regretting the fact of being caught. He would tell on his accomplices too, Butts and Miley and Monroe. Police didn't rely only on that confession, though. They followed up their evidence. The blood and semen, the carpet fibers on the bodies and in the van, hair samples, connecting victims by MO, by the use of the same windlass strangulation. The evidence was overwhelming. He was charged with the 16 strongest cases of murder, 11 counts of robbery, 1 of sodomy, 1 of mayhem. It was over. Any risk of future killing, that is. Now, though, to round up the accomplices. They searched Butt's residence and obtained evidence there. They arrested him and initially charged him with 6 of the murders and 3 counts of robbery. He would claim his innocence too, but soon confess. He would claim to have done it out of fear of Bonin and that his role was limited. He was brought to court on January 2nd, 1981 to be arraigned. However, before they could bring him back to court for his next appearance, he hung himself in his cell with a towel. On July 31st, they got Monroe in Port Huron, Michigan. He was extradited and charged with the murder of Wells. He would testify against Bonin. He was sentenced to 15 to life. He has been repeatedly denied parole, and his next parole eligibility date will be 2029. Miley was found in Texas on August the 11th, brought back to California and charged with 2 murders. He confessed and would eventually plead guilty. Miley would get 2 concurrent sentences of life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In an Orange County case, he would also get 25 to life. He would testify against Bonin. He died on May 25, 2016, of injuries sustained when another inmate attacked him in the exercise yard. Hugh was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder as well. He would get 6 years on a plea to voluntary manslaughter after agreeing to testify against Bonin. He was released in 1985. Bonin was tried first in Los Angeles County. He was convicted of 10 of the murders and given the death penalty. He would be tried in Orange County next. He was convicted of 4 murders there and given the death penalty as well. While awaiting execution and appeals, he frequently corresponded with the mothers of his victims, taking some kind of sick pleasure in refusing them any sign of remorse or any further information about their children. He even told Sean King's mother that her son was his favorite victim because he was such a screamer. He appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, both his convictions and his sentence, and he was denied all that way. He was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin on February 23, 1996. He left at least 1 victim unidentified. His name is profile is UP57039. He was a white male found in Taft, California on November 30th, 1979. He was somewhere between 15 and 27 years old, and he would have died sometime in 1978 or 1979. He was 5'1" to 5'6". His weight could not be estimated as his remains were a near complete skeleton. He did have brown hair. There was a light blue OP brand pullover jacket with California written on the back and brown corduroy pants. The contact for this unidentified male is Kern County. You'll see the phone number on the video. Case number CT79-2742. If you have a family member who went missing, who might be this person, please contact Kern County Sheriffs. Given that Bonin was targeting hitchhikers, this male might be from somewhere other than California. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.